All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast where we discuss the plausibility of sci-fi concepts with experts. I'm your host, Heidi Campo, and today we're exploring the science behind super soldier serums in Captain America. Joining us is Dr. Escalante, and Dr. Escalante is currently an assistant dean and professor of kinesiology at California State San Bernardino. Did I say that right?
That's right.
Oh, I'm so good. And he is also the vice president of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, chair of the NSCA Bodybuilding and Fitness Special Interest Group, scientific advisor for the National Academy of Sports Medicine, and a competitive bodybuilder for, get this, over 20 years. That's amazing because most bodybuilders, they do one show and then they're out because that's a lot. It's a lot to go through. So 20 years resume as a competitive bodybuilder is amazing. So stay with us to the end where Dr. Escalante is going to be tackling our burning question, which is it even remotely possible to enhance our soldiers like they do to Steve Rogers in Captain America? Now, before we jump into this, I do want to highlight how special it is that Dr. Escalante agreed to tackle this topic with us because he has over 100 peer-reviewed manuscripts, abstracts, or magazine web publications. That's insane. He speaks at conferences throughout the nation and the world about physique enhancement, muscular hypertrophy, body composition, performance-enhancing drugs, aka PEDs. I don't know why I said that so excited. I promise I'm not like some kind of crazy addict, but it's such an interesting topic. And sports nutrition. And if that wasn't enough, he was the lead subject matter expert for a comprehensive 20-plus chapter NASM physique and bodybuilding coaching program. Wow. So without further ado, let's get ready for another mind-blowing episode of Reality Check. And I'm going to start with our topic introduction. Everybody loves the character Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, who originally showed up in Timely Comics, not Marvel Comics. He was in a Timely Comics in 1940. And did you guys know that to create the skinny Steve, they had to shoot the scenes 3 different times. Once normal with everybody, the second time with just Chris Evans and a green screen, and the third time was with his body double. And to make it more believable, they had to put marks on normal size Steve's chin that were supposed to represent where small skinny Steve's eyes would be. And this would help the other actors know where to look in these scenes. And after he receives his super soldier injection and is exposed to the beta radiation, they were able to film with Chris Evans at a regular size for the rest of that movie. And I just think the idea of the super soldier serum is extremely exciting. Like you guys see me like dancing over here, basically. And both myself and Dr. Escalante have worked in human performance settings cumulatively for a very long time, and both of us individually for a very long time. And we both have experience with, you've done mostly bodybuilding. You haven't dabbled in strongman, powerlifting.
And not strongman and powerlifting. No, it's mainly been bodybuilding or other sports.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I'll hold down the strongman and powerlifting anecdotes here, but it is a well-known fact that those athletes tend to experiment with a wide range of things that can enhance them because they are very competitive and there's not as much regulation in those sports. And so we do see those athletes really pushing the envelope as far as human performance goes. So Dr. Escalante, tell me some of your initial thoughts with Captain America and what do you think might have been in that serum?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I really appreciate the history of the movie making because that's really neat that you have that background and that information to see how they were able to capture some of it, especially from decades ago, right? But that serum, what could it be? And is it really something that is sci-fi? And there's a little bit of science behind that because actually the U.S. military has been utilizing and examining the use of performance enhancement drugs to enhance the performance of soldiers. So they've actually earmarked some of their funds for research in government agencies to perform research on soldiers, and mainly for the purpose of realistically enhancing performance and actually even for the safety of the soldiers themselves. So Usually it's testosterone or testosterone derivatives that are being used. And these would be considered anabolic steroids that are utilized. And they're used in moderate to, I'm going to say low to moderate dosages, not in extreme super physiological dosages, because obviously safety is still a concern, that they don't go for long terms. But there are actually, if you actually go on, you can go on Google Scholar and put in anabolic steroids and U.S. Army, or anabolic steroids and military, and then you can actually see some of these peer-reviewed publications that have been done. They've even been doing some of this in rats, for example, or other rodents, to see if exposure to some of these anabolic agents can actually work in alleviating symptoms, for example, from, as you know, as a soldier, you're going to be you're going to have explosions all the time that are going to be going on. And this may actually cause small amounts of brain trauma. And then that small amount of brain trauma can actually lead to a reduced testosterone production over time.
Right. And I've known that with MMA fighters are at such a huge risk of low testosterone throughout their career.
Absolutely. So there's a link between all of these. So, some of the things that they're actually looking at is, hey, can we actually utilize some of this testosterone or testosterone derivatives to maybe alleviate some of these symptoms in these soldiers who have gone through these different blasts? Other specific research that has been done that's actually very interesting is, as you know, soldiers go through very intense training, and they may go on very intense missions where sleep is going to be deprived. They're going to have a very limited amount of food. And we know just those two things alone, sleep deprivation is going to be, it significantly impact your ability to perform, to think. It's going to decrease testosterone levels. It's going to also decrease lean body mass over time. So it's not a good situation, that stress alone. Secondly, having a severe caloric deficit. So if you're only eating 500, 800 calories a day because there's limited amount of food or limited time to eat because you're on a mission to save your life, it's going to be very difficult to. And of course, you're moving, you're running, you're walking, you have a backpack, you have gear on. You might have to climb, you might have to stoop, you may have to XYZ. So all of the military stuff that you would see in a movie is there. It's relevant. And as a result of that, think of all of the caloric expenditure that is going on with these soldiers. The stress of being in that you may die in this mission. So you have lack of food, you have the stress of potential death, and then you have the stress of lack of sleep because you don't have time to sleep. Obviously, now you're in this mission for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks over time, where it's gonna have major impacts on your body. So what we do know collectively, these soldiers are gonna drop a significant amount of lean body mass. They're gonna and their body's gonna kind of go into a conservation mode. Not only that, they're not going to be as alert. They're not going to be as strong. They're not going to be able to perform as much. So what they've actually done is, hey, let's actually see if we can maybe enhance their performance and minimize the amount of muscle mass that they're going to lose and minimize the amount of strength that they're going to lose by giving them a special serum, right? And that special serum would be basically like a performance enhancement drug, which would be like an anabolic steroid. So they give them dosages of testosterone at different dosages, anywhere from 200 milligrams up to 750 milligrams. And then so it's not exuberant, but it's enough to potentially create that performance enhancement benefit. And of course, they are monitoring other health risk factors as well. They're not just giving it blindly. It is medically supervised. And it's given in a more responsible setting. And then they're measuring what are the effects of some of these factors. So that in terms of their ability can they retain some of their lean mass over time? Does their strength maintain? Is it maintained over a period of time? So there are various studies that have actually been done in this regard. So this is the type of special serum that can be used by some of these different agencies that have been investigated.
So it sounds like they're primarily using testosterone, and I know there's a cocktail of them out there. And I will say, disclaimer to anybody listening who's under 18, don't touch it. If you are still developing, don't even look into this stuff. Just look at it with a curious mindset. And if you ever do decide that it's something you want to look into, look, I can't stop you, nobody can stop you, but please consult with a highly qualified professional before you touch anything that can chemically alter your body. And that'll be my soapbox. If you want to add anything to that, you can. But now I do know that Anavar was originally designed to help prevent muscle wasting. So is that something that could potentially be beneficial to them as well? Or are there potentially harmful side effects that would minimize the benefit to them?
Yeah, there are. So Anavar is obviously testosterone derivative, but the way that it's usually administered is orally, and for it to not to be broken down and for it to be effective, it's got to be alkylated at the 17th carbon atom for it not to go through that first bypass. So in other words, if you don't alkylate oral steroids at that 17th carbon atom, then your body's going to break it down, and it's not going to really get to produce the effects that you want it to. So it's going to basically break it down, and you're going to have no effects. So oral steroids are all alkylated at the 17th carbon atom to allow for oral administration to be effective. That being said, they pose the greatest risk. So it sounds counterintuitive that an oral pill is more harmful than an injection, because an injection sounds more, I'm going to say, intimidating per se, but at the same time, actually, oral steroids have actually higher risk factors and higher things to be concerned about. So really, the injection is the preferred method of choice, or pellets. There are pellets that can be
That get inserted.
yeah, a low dose of some of that, but typically, I tend to not recommend at all oral steroids, or if people do them very short amounts of time, because prolonged use of that can really create liver injury over time. So whereas you don't see the same effect with the with the injectable versions of the substances. So any one of those that are oral derivatives are going to be actually create more harm in the long term. So use short term, probably not a big deal, but if you're using Anavar for a long period of time, and a long period of time could be 12 weeks, you're going to actually see elevated liver enzymes pretty quickly because your liver has to break that down. So it's going to be, when you're doing an injectable, you're not going to have to do that. And I want to backtrack a little bit. I'm glad you gave the disclaimer, because I think so many times people just want a shortcut to getting the results, and they automatically think, oh, it's just because of steroids or PEDs that people get this. And you have to really backtrack a little bit. You have to realize, whether we're talking baseball, where players are hitting 60, 70 home runs a year, or your sprinters like the Miriam Joneses that are breaking world records. These people were the best of the best before they even touched the stuff, and they were doing a lot of things right before they even touched the stuff. So I always like to say there's a hierarchy in what you need to do, and at the very bottom of that hierarchy is basically what's your genetic potential and who are your parents, right? So there's a big component of that, and then layered atop of that is going to be are you training properly? Are you dieting properly? Are you feeding your body the appropriate micro and macronutrients to support your training? Are you sleeping enough? Are you getting wasted every weekend, and drinking a significant amount of alcohol? Because if I'm thinking of that young individual, right, that they think, if I take this, that's what's going to get me to the next level. But they're doing all these other things wrong, right? So we can't choose the fate of our parents, but we can choose, if we train right and effectively and efficiently and smartly. We can choose if we sleep enough and adequately. We can choose if our try to kind of mitigate our stress by, the choices that we make. We can choose if we drink or not, or if we do, how much and how often. We can choose what we put in our mouth every day in getting enough protein, getting enough micronutrients, getting enough XYZ, getting enough calories. And if you're not doing any of those things right, the drugs will work, but they're going to work at a much lower amount. And really, I think you need to build that foundation of consistent training, consistent nutrition, consistent sleep, not for 6 months, not for a year. I'm talking for years.
Yeah.
Then build that foundation, and then reach your natural potential, and then figure out, what it is. And you may realize you don't even need to use some of these things. Or you may realize once you're a mature adult and you have the maturity and the financial resources to be able to consult with a medical professional in using some of this stuff, then you're going to be able to make better decisions. Because that's another thing that I like to say is sometimes people think of, first of all, there's a cost to using these things.
And it could be quite a big cost that people don't realize.
Yes, it can. I mean, sometimes to the tune of I'm talking, $1,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 a month. What it is that you're doing in the quantities. So that's number one. Number two, no physician's ever going to prescribe any of this stuff. So you in the United States, you are breaking the law because it's not it's a controlled substance, right? And there are underground sources in which you'd have to get some of this stuff. Number three is you also have to realize that I like to say it's kind of like buying a high-end car. So let's say you buy your dream Mercedes or your dream BMW, and okay, perfect. I can afford that $1,500 a month payment. That's cool. But then you think about how much it's going to cost to do the insurance and cost to do the maintenance on that car when you change the oil, when you do all these other things. And this is what the other external factors. So in addition to that costly month to just get the stuff, you should have earmarked a certain amount of money to see a medical doctor, to get blood work done, to get other medical tests done, to make sure that your health is good over time. Because this stuff typically doesn't kill you acutely. It kills you chronically over time. So if you're not monitoring all these health biomarkers over time, you're setting yourself up for disaster. So and when we see the research, we actually see that most anabolic steroid users, when they start, they don't use it one time or two times. They use it for a range of 5 to 15 years.
Oh, yeah, that's from 20 to whenever you start winding down your athletic career. And I'll let you finish your point, but I do want to ask you, so you've done a significant amount of research with this yourself, and ethically you can't prescribe anything because, like you said, it's illegal, but observational research is allowed. So you have been in the fortunate academic position to be able to research this. And this is, I still feel like PEDs, it's researched in people's garage gyms. And you are truly one of the few people who is putting this under an academic lens. So I'm curious about your research. And the other thing I'm really curious about, going back to what you were saying, is laying the groundwork of eating a healthy diet, getting enough sleep and whatnot. That is the thing that just kills me about our military, is how they just do not provide an environment for their soldiers to do that. And I understand missions are one thing, but then you look at some of these other places where these guys are being brought up, like West Point. My husband went to West Point, and just hearing some of the stories of, okay, you guys have 5 minutes to eat your food, eat it as fast as you can, and just some really, really unhealthy conditions. And then they expect their soldiers or operators to perform optimally when they didn't cover any of those basics to begin with. So those are kind of my two questions: is your research, and then just talking to how maybe some of our military members can undo the damage of their lifestyle that's forced upon them through their job.
Yeah, so great question. So the research I have done, you're right, because of the line of work that we're in, and because it's very rare to see most of the people that are doing that are actually prescribing the stuff. it's a medical group, medical doctor. So like Dr. Pope is a famous researcher in Harvard who actually does a lot of this stuff. He's a medical doctor and a PhD, and he is actually one of the few people that has prescribed people some of these things. And again, it's medically supervised. That being said, you can only give so much drug, right? So the highest quantities that have been reported in the literature are somewhere around 600 milligrams per week of testosterone, which is a high amount, but it's relatively a low amount compared to what is used in the field. Because there's no way that an institutional review board that protects safety of participants is going to approve you to give something to the effect of 2 grams, 3 grams of drug where you know that it's going to have deleterious effects. So that's never going to happen. So as a result, to your point, most of the research that we see in the field has to be observational in nature. So in other words, I'm not prescribing anything to people. I'm not telling them what to take, how much to take. All I'm saying is, are you a performance enhancement drug user? Yes or no? And then I may take some that are yes, some that are no. And then all I do is I observe and I ask, what are you doing? What are you taking? How much are you taking? And then I can actually observe. I can do certain tests, for example, like we can measure blood pressure. We could measure, and there are other things that have been done. Like they've actually, not in my lab, but they've actually studied, for example, different components of the heart, like ejection fraction, or they've measured other health biomarkers. They can actually take blood and look at what happens to these different biomarkers, such as hematocrit levels or red blood cell counts or liver enzymes. So you can look at other biomarkers of cardiovascular function, such as cholesterol. So you can run a lipid panel and see what's going on. So these are all things that you can actually do, and you can actually to look at to see what are the repercussions or the effects of these higher dosages on people that take X, Y, or Z. So that's kind of the nature of what we see in research. And in my lab, what we recently published, it just came out in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in August. We actually looked at what were the nutritional, exercise, and performance enhancement drug practices of competitors leading up to competition in the last 30 days. So one of the profiles that we ask is, hey, what kind of drugs are you using? If you're using any, so there were some that we're not using, but a large percentage were. And this was just at a local show. This wasn't at a pro level show. This was a national qualifying event. And then we're asking them what are the dosages that they took per week. And we see a lot of different things. We see SARMS, we see different types of anabolic steroids, we see human growth hormone, we see insulin, we see thyroid medication. So we see a lot of different things that are being used by these athletes, not prescribed by me or anybody else. It was something that they chose to do, and they were comfortable in reporting it. And it's very interesting to see what we to see what is reported. In addition, I've also had participants come to the lab who are using performance enhancement drugs, and some of the observations that I make, I'll measure their blood pressure, and you have a 28-year-old male or female with hypertension. This is somebody that's eating healthy, it has a low body fat percentage, and they have hypertension. Well, and then when you kind of ask why, you look at the drug profile, and then it probably makes sense because some of that can actually lead to hypertension because a high amount of testosterone and other performance enhancement drugs can activate the renin-angiotensin system, the ROS system, which can then increase hypertension. That's one of the potential side effects, and other cardiovascular effects that it can have. So those are the things that we actually see, with people coming in the lab.
Yeah, and it's so scary that it's like you just said, they're taking all sorts of different things, because the coaching advice that's coming out there that's not coming from trained medical professionals is either, well, this is what my coach had me do, or it's like, this is just what I read on Reddit. And so it's like, it's so varied. So it is really neat what you're doing, because I'm a big believer in research and legalization, because I'm like, I think we need to put this stuff on the map academically so that people can get educated so they're not getting hurt. because I do see the news, and bodybuilders are, the pro level ones are dropping like flies right now, and it's really sad. And if we did have more education going into this, we could save a lot of lives and not have such varied results in what people are taking, and people could understand their left and right limits of what's safe and what's not, and what's maybe pushing it in a little bit in the red, but it's okay if you're doing X, Y, or Z. And I think that's really cool what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. And we did just publish a paper at the end of 2022 looking at, we looked at autopsy reports of bodybuilders who died under the age of 50. And it was actually, and this is related to cardiovascular deaths. And, it's amazing and scary when you see what is there. The average age of death was like 36, 37 years old. And I mean, we saw an individual died, 26 years old, dying of cardiac complications. That's not a normal scenario when you see it. And then when you actually see the autopsy reports, you see, what did these individuals have in common? Well, the weight of the heart. So the heart got too big, essentially. So we have cardiac hypertrophy occurring, where the average human heart of a male is about 370 some grams, whereas these individuals were basically at, close to 600 grams, the highest.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah. So you see a lot of this, and then you see left ventricular hypertrophy that's prominent in a lot of them. You see atherosclerosis that's very common in a lot of them. So you see some common threads, and you can't say cause and effect, right? But there's definitely a smoking gun. And you need to investigate further, because there are other components that are going to contribute to some of this. But nevertheless, one common denominator is the amount of anabolic steroids that they are using in the polypharmacy that you see. So that's very common.
And that's probably why we see the military sticking to smaller doses of testosterone, which kind of circles back to my other question, is how can service members or operators mitigate, all the atrophy and the issues that they're experiencing in the field, or even just guys going to West Point or in boot camp, or just, any military jobs, or even first responders for that matter.
Yeah. And I, this is kind of a difficult question, because I do see the point of, if you're a soldier, you kind of have to, if you're out on the battlefield, right, you don't have the luxury of eating every 3 hours. You don't have the luxury of sleeping 8 hours. You don't have the luxury of training. You don't have the luxury of water in a lot of instances. So as a result, I think the reason they kind of train them in this regard is because that's the reality of what their environment could potentially be when they're out on the field. So I think if they don't do that, they may be doing them a disservice, because then they never experience that. Now, that being said, I think you have to kind of find that balance within that, because obviously, if you're trying to maximize performance, then you need to take some of these things into consideration to be able to do that. And I think you may be able to find a compromise, or maybe and the Army, the military is actually working on some of this, where I actually just reviewed a paper on different types of gels and bars that are used for the military. And they're actually looking at that component. It's like, what kind of functional foods can be made available to these soldiers that is easy for them to consume on the field, in the battlefield, in when they're out and about, that is actually more nutritionally balanced, that can actually maximize muscle protein synthesis, that has adequate amounts of protein and the right quality of protein. So this is some of the things that they are looking at right now, which is actually very interesting to see it, because it's something that is needed. And then now what they're seeing is like, hey, some of these bars that they're using, maybe it wasn't the best composition of food, and maybe not the best type of quality protein. So can they give them something else that's going to be more efficient for them to be able to use, more beneficial for them when they're out on the field? So to your point, so that they are getting better fuel and minimizing the losses that they may get from being in those conditions.
That's cool. So it sounds like, I mean, I'm so glad to hear they're working on it, because it just kills me to see these guys suffering, guys and gals. But it really makes me think about more like any other future technologies. And like in Captain America, they brought the Vita radiation into the mix. He gets injected with his serum, and then he's exposed to the Vita radiation, and boom, he's a foot taller. He's super muscular, got handsome. I'm like, I'll take that drug. It's like, just make me look good. But are there any other I don't know, just future enhancements or emerging technologies beyond chemical that are complementary to augmenting human performance?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think we touched on one briefly, which is nutrition. I mean, what is the most potent drug? I mean, when I speak to different athletes, I tell them it's like, what's the most potent drug that you can use that's legal? Your food, right? And realistically, I mean, that is your energy system, and that is the way that you can really fuel your body. So to name it a drug is probably not appropriate, but it is a tool that can definitely help you. And essentially, I mean, foods are chemicals in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way our body breaks them down. So it's just that they're different organic chemicals that are broken down, and through biochemical processes, we utilize them for energy. We utilize them to build muscle. We utilize it for all of the biological functions that are there. So when we see the food, I think looking specifically at what type of macro and micronutrients and in what ratios can we actually use, and in focusing the technology on that, we can actually get a lot of benefits. And then even looking at things as like, not only quantities, but even potentially timing of some of these things. And with the soldier specifically, I think that's something that, again, they're kind of starting to look at, where, you're not going to be able to sit down and have a chicken breast and some rice and some vegetables and oatmeal and egg whites and berries and, be able to sit down and have a gourmet meal. But you may be able to get this bar under your belt that's not going to spoil, that's not going to melt, that is a functional food, that is going to give me, some fiber, some micronutrients, the right type of protein, the right quantity of protein, so that I can actually absorb it. That's not going to upset my stomach, that I can actually function, I can think, and fuel my body accordingly. So I think that's one way in which we can look at things. Hydration strategies would be something else, right? So what type of things can they do to maintain their hydration levels? So obviously you're going to have to drink fluids in addition to that, but maybe in certain extreme environments, maybe it may need to be enhanced with certain electrolytes that may actually enhance performance. So looking at that technology, and then other things that may help would be any information that you can get to look at their that gives biofeedback, for example. So some of the wearable technology can actually...
Got my Oura Ring on. I love Oura Ring. Big fan. Unsponsored.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's great. So you can actually look at, what is happening under these certain conditions, and then you can gather that data, and then you can make decisions based on those biomarkers that your body is reading, whether it's based on heart rate, or sleep, quality of sleep, all of those things, heart rate variability. Those are all things that I think that can be monitored, and then you could actually see the effects of different interventions that you're doing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, which I love, is that there's not really any emerging technologies that are new or different, like, I don't know, electromagnetism or radiation or something kind of sci-fi futuristic that could aid in our enhancement. It's all of the tools that we already have at our disposal. And I just love that. But there's nothing, because I've heard, I don't know, some weird things. Like someone told me about, there's like this, I don't know if it was like a wearable, like a band or something, but it cools down your blood. So it slows down fatigue because you stay cooler longer and the body doesn't have to work as hard to prevent fatigue. Like, are there any I guess this would be so much in the bodybuilding sphere, but when dealing with things like soldier fatigue and needing to perform at high levels for long times, are there any other technologies that are emerging that can aid with advanced human performance?
That I think I probably haven't read enough in that particular area to see what is available. I mean, I'm always a skeptic, when it comes to some of this, as it's, but I'm one of those that I like to learn from everyone. And then, just because I'm a skeptic doesn't mean that I'm not going to look at it. So what I like to see is like, okay, we have this technology. Here's the proposed mechanism of action. Here's the proposed benefits of what it may do. Okay, so now let's put the scientific lens to it, and then let's test it, over time. And then to me, I like to see, make sure that it's a well-conducted study, that everything is controlled accordingly to the best possible way. Everything is randomized, statistics are run correctly, that it's adequately powered with a good sample size, controlling as much of the variables as you can, and then test it out, test the hypothesis, and see if it works. And then if you see positive results in one, then okay, cool. We have now one piece of evidence. That doesn't mean it works for sure. I'd want to see 3 or 4 other studies conducted in different labs with different people, that don't have necessarily a conflict of interest in what they're doing, right? And to me, that's the biggest thing. If you only see, this is a good little sidebar, because people sometimes often say, well, this research is positive because it's funded by the company, right? Well, but who's going to fund the research otherwise, right? Like,
That's actually a great point.
I mean, a pharmaceutical company is only going to test their drug. Why are they going to test somebody else's drug? So just because a pharmaceutical company sponsored the research doesn't mean that it's a biased study. What you want to be careful with is, who conducted the study? Was it randomized? Was it controlled? What analyses were done? And then now, if you only see one study from one company done by the same lab over and over again, I don't raise a red flag, but I raise a yellow flag, because it's only one lab. So, is there a relationship there? But now if I see that company sponsors research with lab A, B, C, and D, and now we see consistent results among all these different labs, then I'm going to be a little bit more accepting of that, because I'm going to see, because you may have one biased scientist that you may be able to buy out, but it's unlikely that you're going to be able to buy out 4, 5, or 6, because as scientists, we take pride in our research and in our reputation. So,
well, and that's what, so for those of you listening, Dr. Escalante and I, we are both members of the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So we were talking a little bit at the national conference this past year. And I told him that was something I appreciate about you, is that you live in both worlds. You are highly academic, but you're not just a nerd who's just sitting there reading books all the time. Like, you are also very active, involved in, like, I guess, like, your self-research. And so you truly intimately understand everything that you're doing, more so than just what someone's doing with, like, the research only. So I think that's super cool. And it's interesting to see, like, what kind of these limits of human performance could really end up being, because we're talking about, like, what some of these drugs can do and what they can't do. So let's go back to your original metaphor. We're talking about having all of your baseline things taken care of. I've always thought of it this way. You have your offense and your defense, or you have your above the line and below the line. Your defense would be everything below the line: sleep, nutrition, hydration, electrolytes, low stress. Like, that would be everything defense. So above that, if we're thinking offense, that would be all of the augmentation, the stuff that's beyond that. So let's just play around with some hypotheticals here, because in the movie, Steve can run 13 miles in a half hour, which is a half marathon in a half hour, which is half the time of the current world record, which is held by a Kenyan, Alexander Mustio. I hope I said that name right. So what are some of our current understandings of the limits of PEDs and how much they can enhance someone? And I've always heard it described as like with those NOS boosts you put on the car from Fast and Furious. I've actually never seen those movies, but I know about them. But you can put one of those boosts on like a crappy little Honda Civic, and yeah, it's going to make it faster, but it's only going to go that much faster. Or you can put a booster on a Ferrari and it's going to fly. So again, with your having your defensive stuff lined up, it's like you want to make sure you're a Ferrari before you start to boost yourself. You don't want to try and strap a rocket to a Honda Civic.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy to do that and to say that, because a lot of people do like to try to strap that booster on their old beat up, not even a Honda Civic. That's on their Pinto, their Ford Pinto from back in the day that's barely up and running. So so you're doing all these other things wrong, and then you want to take this shortcut to take this drug, and it's just not going to work. I mean, it's going to work, but it's not going to work at maximum capacity. Where if you have, like you said, all your defensive bases covered, now all of a sudden you're going to be able to do that. And then that being said, also, we can't choose our parents, and there's a lot of inter-individual variability in our responses to training, our responses to nutrition. So you always have hyper responders, moderate responders, non-responders to everything. Where you see this in the science where I love to look at the inter-individual variability. So when they report those, so you may have individuals going through the exact same nutritional intervention, training intervention, dietary supplement intervention, and you have some responders that are like, whoa, like they respond, their strength goes way up. And then you have other responders who do the exact same thing, that are male or female, that are the same age, and then they get worse sometimes, or they only get like a tiny bit better. And you see some of these things that do occur. So I think that the same thing happens with some of these performance enhancement drugs, where you're going to have some individuals where a little bit goes a really long way. And then you have others where it takes a lot to get the same amount of response. So I think this is where there's a disconnect when sometimes people say, oh, well, this strong man or this top level bodybuilder, like they say that they only take this much stuff, they must be lying. Not necessarily. I mean, it could actually be that they're so genetically gifted and they're such hyper responders for that particular stimulus that it only takes a little bit of that to really get that great response for them. And same thing with side effects, because I like to use this example. You've probably seen that grandma who's been smoking for 75 years.
She's doing great.
She's doing great. Who doesn't die of cancer, right? But with her, it's like she doesn't really respond negatively to this smoking stimulus. So same thing with the performance enhancement drug. You may have an individual where they can take a lot of drug and it doesn't really affect them negatively, whereas another individual, just a little amount of drug can greatly affect their cardiovascular system, their kidneys, their liver, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of those different things, which is why we're going to kind of go back around to our first point, which is you need to monitor your health all the time to see what is going on with your health as you're using these interventions and different quantities. And not only measure it when you're off, because that's what often a lot of people do, is like they only measure things. I'm going to go to the doctor when I'm off cycle. No, you need to go to the doctor when you're on the stuff to kind of figure out. So you have a baseline. This is what happens when I'm off. I'm not completely off. This is what happens when I'm on at high levels. And then this is what happens when I'm off at completely or off at lower levels. And what's the trend? Because if certain biomarkers are creating a negative trend over time, then that's not necessarily a good thing. So cholesterol, for example, if you see your HDL cholesterol consistently low and your LDL cholesterol consistently high, and you see your blood pressure consistently high when you're on these drugs, there's going to be some cardiac remodeling going on, and you better pay attention. It's not going to happen overnight, but over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, that's where you're going to have some problems.
Interesting. Wow. I'm just eating this up right now. I'm really kind of thinking back to Mike Stone. So Dr. Stone is another legendary person in the field. I respect him a lot, but he did a really fun lecture a while back about the past, present, and future of the profession of strength and conditioning, human performance, and research. And he was talking about some of the things in the future talking about things like CRISPR and um, physical augmentations, putting different kinds of metals or systems in the human body to enhance performance. But it makes me really think about what you just said: is some people are super responders and some people react very poorly. Can we test is there any way that we can predict who's going to perform or respond really well or really poorly to something? Is that genetics? Is it something we don't know what it is right now? Like, is there any way for us to test and predict how someone's going to respond to something?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to be able to see some of that. You see different, different genetic components of an individual, or different things are going to be expressed under different conditions, and some are going to be expressed more than others. But the problem with that is that there are so many things that we could look at. Is like, which one do you kind of identify, and to actually identify the specific one. And I'll give one big example is, like with creatine monohydrate, we have responders and non-responders with some of that. And, like one baseline responder thing that you can typically see is like, well, if you're a vegan, you're typically going to be a good responder because your resting creatine levels are going to be low. Therefore, you're probably going to respond high, rather than somebody who's not vegan, who consumes some meat products. Their resting creatine levels are going to be relatively higher. But that being said, there may be some genetic components there in addition to that may actually make people more responders or less respondent to this particular, in this case, creatine. But it could be filling creatine with fill in the blank, right? With training, with a particular protein intake, with a particular drug that you're using, you're going to have different responses. And the thing is there are so many genes that we could look at that we don't really know which one to target. So I think we're moving in that direction. I think, we're starting to see some of these things, with regards to genetics and testing. But I think we have a long way to go.
That's so exciting, because it's like I just we just uploaded the Dune episode where we talked about genetic enhancements and how the Bene Gesserit order in the world of Dune is able to modify their genetics over time. And that episode ended up going up really heavy into eugenics. And it ended up being a very grave warning for us to not play God. But it's like, and I understand that and I heed that, but there's still that deep temptation. It's like, let's see just how high a human can jump. Let's see how strong we can get a human. And it's like, I think with my personality type, I'm a performance driven person. I always am going to be curious with how far we can push a human being ethically to the highest level of performance possible. But it's like, we do need to remind ourselves as a scientific community. It's like, when we start looking at things like genetics, like we learned in the Dune episode, you don't know what expressing one gene could do to something else. Because you could select for a certain gene, but you don't realize that gene's also associated with something completely different. And if you guys are interested in that episode, I'll link that one so you can get that whole spiel from my geneticist expert. But I'm also curious, and I did have some people ask me to ask you this question. SARMS, they're such a hot topic right now. Are they something that academically we're looking at as a viable option for human performance or soldier augmentation in the future? Or are they just some weird thing that a bunch of guys in their warehouse gym are getting really into because they're not a PED, but they are? And for those of you listening, I'm doing quotations.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Before you go there, I'm gonna answer that question. But there's a book that actually talks about pushing the limits of human performance. It's called The Perfection Point. And if you haven't read that book, it actually kind of talks about it. It hypothesizes like what's the fastest we can run the 100-meter dash? What's the fastest we could swim a certain event? And it kind of gives some hypotheses based on the technology that is available. And it basically kind of pushes all of the elements of human performance. And it's a really cool book. So if you haven't read it, I encourage. And I read it a few years ago, and I have to look it up because I couldn't remember the title of it. But it's called The Perfection. It's how fast, how far, how high.
Oh, I'm
So it's a
definitely
real,
going to read that because I'm really interested in that. So
yeah,
SARMs, everybody,
yeah,
it's the question that I want to say like every guy in college in their 20s and their 30s, they're like, it's not a drug, so it's not as bad. It's like you're the expert.
yeah. So it is a drug. It's selective androgen receptor modulators. So basically, they are drugs. They're very most of them are not FDA approved for anything. There's very little that we know about them. And what we see, actually, there was an article published not too long ago by Dr. Darren Willoughby and his group of individuals, and they actually took an individual that was using some SARMs over a period of time. It was a case study, they did find some improvements in performance, but we see a lot of deleterious side effects. And in fact, what we see is the deleterious side effects are, as bad or worse than using anabolic steroids or other performance enhancement drugs, and that the amount of benefit is actually not as good. So,
Oh, yeah, you wouldn't know that with the bro science. The bro science loves it.
yeah, so what we see is there's really not a lot of. I mean, if you're going to choose, if you're going to cross the road. So number one, a SARM is still crossing the road. So it's not creatine, it's not protein. A SARM is crossing the road to a performance enhancement drug. Now, so it's a type of performance enhancement drug. How effective is it? Not very. That has a lot of side effects, and we know very little about them. Again, there's been a lot of research on anabolic steroids over the years because they were used and they are used medically and prescribed medically for a lot of different reasons. So we have research going back, 60, 70 years plus in that arena. SARMs, we don't have a lot. And in fact, again, this is why most of them are not FDA approved. So you're really not going to get the same benefit, and you're going to probably get as much, if not more, side effect. So the risk to benefit ratio is different. The one group of individuals where it's a little bit different is with females, because they do have that ergogenic benefit. They do still have some potential consequences, but the main thing is the virilization is usually a lot less with them. So virilization in females is going to be typically less with SARMs than with others, dosage appropriate. That being said, we have a lot of research today on the effects of females in using anabolic steroids, because what is the biggest thing that we see a lot of people doing, which is basically the transgender population, right?
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that, but that's massive hormone usage.
It's huge. So if you have a female that wants to become a transgender male, what is the number one thing that they're prescribed? It's going to be
Testosterone.
testosterone. So we have a ton of research on that. And we know actually where you cross the line, because the side effect for a female who doesn't want to look like a man would be virilization, right? So, but where you cross that line, because that's a desired, quote unquote, side effect for a female looking to be a transgender male. They want to look like a man, right? They want to be they have those male characteristics. So as a result, we actually know like what kind of dosages can you utilize before you cross that line, because the goal of that research and those individuals is to cross the line so that they can look more like males.
Yeah. And that's when their testosterone, for women, that's when their testosterone starts getting at or above like the 500 limit.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even 300, to be honest, that's the lower end that's the nanograms per deciliter. Because even at 300, I mean, that's still significantly higher than what a female's going to produce. It's on the low end for a male, but it's still on exorbitantly high for a female.
What would you say is the optimal testosterone range for men? For optimal, not just average.
Yeah, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of at least 700 to maybe 1,000
Okay.
would be kind of a good range. where
That validates me, because that's what I say to all my athletes as well. I'm like, that's where you want to look to be. And it kills me when they get their blood work back and they're at like 150, 200. I'm like, you are a 24-year-old man. You should not be at 150.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they're doing that, then there's definitely some environmental things going on. This is where you're probably looking at alcohol intake, sleep, stress, other things.
McDonald's, yep, all of it. So I have one more question before I let you say if there's anything else you wanted to cover. But would peptides are peptides similar to SARMs in the fact that they have more negatives than positives, or are they a totally different animal?
Yeah, they're slightly different, but at the same time, I think it's one of those where there's not a lot of research in them either. So I think a lot of what we see is anecdotal. So as a result, it's one of those where you really have to take it with a grain of salt. And I mean, you just have to be so careful. I mean, I don't know if you remember, I can't remember the young gentleman's name right now. I'm blanking on it, but Boston Lloyd. So Boston Lloyd died at 29 years old. Okay. And Boston Lloyd, he utilized anabolic steroids, yes. But in addition to abusing anabolic steroids for many years, he was his own self-experiment. He abused everything, including these peptides and various types of peptides. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, you don't know what you're putting into your body. It's you don't know what their side effects are. And he was utilizing that in higher dosages. So, it's like, yes, he did die. This is one good example where, it's not always cause and effect. A lot of people say, well, it's because of the steroids. I'm like, well, he was taking anabolic steroids, yes, in high dosages, but he was taking a lot of other things, or well above and beyond that, which contributed. I mean, and he ended up having an aneurysm, and he passed away. But he was already on, he was like on stage 4 liver or kidney failure.
Oh, that's so sad at that age. Well, it makes me think also like Rich Piana. And I remember when he died, everyone was just like, the steroids were probably just a fraction of the drugs that were in his body when he died, because that guy was taking everything possible and probably things that we haven't even heard of. He was the drug guy. This has been amazing. Has there been any other things that you wanted to touch on, or that you really wanted to mention to this audience before we get to our reality check moment? Because you're like, I could talk to you all day, but I know you've got important things to do. So what are some other maybe important things you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna double dip on the importance of working with a healthcare professional to get your health checked. And this is whether you're on drugs or not. I mean, I think a lot of individuals that are healthy, they avoid going to the doctor and getting regular blood work done. So, I mean, I think at minimum once a year to check all of those things. But definitely, if you're using performance enhancement drugs, that should be something that you do 3 to 4 times a year, and visit your doctor at least a couple times a year to get all of those things in check, and make sure that you're monitoring your health over time, because otherwise you're just putting your head in the sand and you're not really looking at what's happening. And you may look great on the outside, but you're rotting on the inside.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you're going to be a statistic, and you don't want to be a statistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many resources for that. There's even online systems that, like, you can do subscriptions where it's blood work. They keep your blood work all in like a nice database. And if you have any recommendations for those, you can email me and I will put those in the link or in the description box below. But let's do our reality check moment. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 5, how realistic would you say that Captain America's transformation was from pure fiction to science fact?
Well, considering he ran a 30-minute half marathon, I would say it's probably a 3, just because it was that's still very extreme, regardless of what you're taking. But regardless, there's definitely some likelihood that something was working.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. We got a 3. So thank you so much for coming on. Are there any other promotions, places where people can reach you? If people want to follow up about your research, where's the best places for them to get a hold of you?
Yes, I think the easiest one is via my social media on Instagram, which is at Dr. GFit. That's all spelled out. So Dr. GFit. And you can find me there, or you can actually just Google me, Guillermo Escalante, CSUSB, or Guillermo Escalante Bodybuilding. You'll get access to my website, or you can find me on my university website there, and you can find my contact information.
Perfect. Well, I'm definitely excited to read more of your research that you're working on. And I know, we've done so much the past 70 years of research, and the next 20, I think, are going to be even more exciting because we have such a greater foundation to build on. So I'm excited. So thank you, everybody, so much for coming on Reality Check today. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with Dr. Escalante's score of the Super Soldier Serum. And if you have anything interesting to add, or questions, or anything that you wanted to add to the conversation, please let us know in the comments. Till next time.